So this parable in Luke 11 concerning the return of the unclean spirit has nothing to do with our present life now. It points to the judgment and the resurrection of the dead. So when we're reading this parable, we have to go back a little bit and consider what Jesus is saying here. They were accusing Jesus of casting out the demons or driving them out by means of Beelzebul, the archperson of the demons. This is blaspheming of the Holy Spirit. And those, according to the blaspheming of the Holy Spirit, do not have remittance, who are actually the context of the left named of Matthew 25:41, and the judgment, which is the context of the returning of the unclean spirit. So, if we back up here, let me find it. Verse 17, where it says, dwelling site falls upon dwelling site. One dwelling site is the dwelling site of God, which is the outcalled. The other dwelling site is that of Satan. Satan has a dwelling site, and God has a dwelling site. Satan is a regent. Jesus Christ is a regent. Okay, so there's always the counterfeit that Satan has to God. Satan has a regency. But if also the Satan was parted on himself, how will his regency be made to stand? Everything is pointing to the judgment. So, he even says here that the regency comes prior on them, because they won't come into it. Therefore, they will be your judges. They who? Your sons. He's talking to a left-named audience of Matthew 25:41. So, when we come down to this parable, the return of the unclean spirit, what we have to understand is that when the unclean spirit has come out from the human, this is when the human dies. And then the spirit is coming through waterless places, where actually this word waterless is seen in Jude. Verse 12, which all of this is the same context of the judgment of Diabolos and his angels. Where if we back up to verse 6, the angels not guarding their own being a dwelling, compared to Sodom, Gomorrah, etc., is then the same context of 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. So waterless is a key word to demons. Coming back here to the parable. So the demon lost its dwelling when the human dies. But it's saying, I will return into my dwelling site, which is the dwelling site of the demons, in that group of people, in the same context of 2 Peter 2:17 and Jude verse 12, according to the reward of unrighteousness, the children of curse who go the way of Balaam's reward, etc. So this is the whole context. Jesus is speaking to a fourth watch time audience, a cursed audience. So when the demon, having come and returning, finds it having been swept and adorned, is in the resurrection, because there's a resurrection of both the good and malicious, where when we come back in resurrection, we're not going to be like, if you're 80 years old and you died in the hospital, you're not going to awaken 80 years old in the hospital. This is what swept and adorned refers to. Where thou we see the unclean spirit, beside takes with himself 7 ulterior of a different kind spirits, more evil than himself. And then here, this statement, and the last state of that human becomes worse than the foremost ones, points back to 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 20, where Peter's making this same statement basically. The last have become worse than them for the foremost, where again, the context all here has to do with the judgment that's impending. The word judgment is found in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 9, and verse 11. So the context of the judgment, also seen in 2 Peter 3:7, is the context of what Jesus is saying in Luke 11. The Aeonian fire of Matthew 25:41 is that which is being guarded for fire into the day of judgment and the whole away loosening of the dishonoring human. This is the context of who Jesus is talking to when the unclean spirit returns with 7 ulterior more evil, where the last state of that human becomes worse than the foremost ones. Again, 2 Peter 2:20. The last having become worse for them than the foremost. Think about it.